the medical school.
Well, even if I die someplace else, then I'm supposed to contact them and
Yeah. Yeah, not at that point. Once you've died, it's not about viability of organs. It's not organ donation. But your research, your scientific research, I mean, the knowledge that might save the life of another person.
the thermal life in the other lives. That's the cells. They're going forever.
Oh, sure. I don't know if that answered your question. So let me just get my notes out. Did you get one of these? So this is a handout that I'm not actually going to teach from today, but because of the limited amount of time that we have here, it covers the bulk of discussion and conversation around organ donation. But let me just start by introducing myself. My name is Rabbi Yaffa, Shira, Sultan, and I am a hospital chaplain at Howard County General Hospital, and then I was a hospice chaplain for 6.5 years at JESA, Jewish Social Services Agency. And so the discussion that we're going to have today is one that I have with families privately. And so we'll focus on it in a broader conversation today. And I suspect that you'll have questions. And I want to make sure that there's time for those questions. So let me just... in the blurb, what I said was we'll touch on these questions today, and then you will be encouraged to read more on your own, and that's why I provided that. The handout comes from this book. This is my version, which is falling apart. Matters of Life and Death, which was written by a conservative rabbi of great learning, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who, and so this text tends to be for the conservative reform and reconstructionist denominations, a main source. And what he has done is brought together the different approaches to organ donation from across all of the denominations, including the diversity within Orthodoxy. So it captures it pretty well. I do want to mention that I am coming in as a Reconstructionist rabbi, and I am going to attempt to touch on all of the broader issues that come up for people from different denominations. And you're going to hear some differences. You're going to hear some majority opinions and minority opinions that are brought to bear on the decision-making here. A number of references that I make today come from an organization called HODS, H-O-D-S, which is the Halachic Organ Donor Society. So the back of your booklet here today has a bibliography of a number of articles and books that have been written that discuss different aspects of organ donation and some of the different pieces that we have to keep in mind when we're making such decisions. So it's actually quite lengthy. I would suggest that you Google it online so, because those bibliographies, some of them can be quite dense. So I would actually push this book if you'd like additional research. But the entire chapter on organ donation and cadaver donation is in your hands right now. So I think you'll have a fair amount of, and I want to start today by asking you what you believe to be the Jewish, which is a very broad term. I have people saying, what's the Jewish approach to organ donation? What's the Jewish approach to the mourning process? You know, do we have to do the traditional vidui? We have some creative viduis out there. What are you bringing in to our class today is what your current understanding is? If you don't mind, anyone who wants to, you can pass. I want to know to whom I'm teaching, what your understanding.
I guess I'll go first. I'm Norman Engelberg. I grew up Orthodox. In that community, I believe, it may not have been rightful, but I believe that you could not do organ donation because in life to come, you have to have an intact body. Since I've become a reconstructionist, I found that otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Any other?
I really know nothing about the Jewish thoughts and organ donation.
Go ahead.
I grew up believing that cremation is out. Although that is my wish.
Okay. We have changing beliefs and choices that people are making in the Jewish community today. And it is bringing Jewish law in, but it's also bringing in anthropology, psychosocial approaches, and you see this in Reconstructionism. We say that the past, or halacha, has a vote, but not a veto. So you'll find your way through. I'm going to present the slightly more halakhic approach to it, just so that you know the conceptions. Does anyone else want to share anything?
I grew up conservative, and what I can recollect is it's honoring the sanctity of bodies, but my later life, I'm thinking the emphasis on saving a life is really was paramount.
Well, there's my class. We can leave. But I'm going to break it down a little more. Okay. Anyone else want to share anything? Do you want to say?
I've spent a little bit of time on the Halakhic Organ Donor Society website, and my favorite feature of it is kind of the landing page. You have 60 ultra-Orthodox rabbis and their pictures, and the stamp that says, "Hey, I'm an organ donor," and they almost look like they're baseball cards.
I know, I've seen that.
Which there are baseball cards of the Orthodox Rebbe's, but it's a very powerful thing, and as somebody who grew up in the Reform tradition and has always kind of had a total comfort with the element of, if it's going to be of use to someone else, I don't need to take it with me, but to see the HODS website is really kind of cool. The first time I saw it, I remember thinking yes, this should be promoted.
Yeah, we have Rabbi Tendler, Shlomo Riskin. You have all of these, well, the big names, some of whom are biomedical ethicists themselves. So I saw that. Okay, so good. We have a general sense. So I'd like to just start by talking about the need of organ donors today. And we have about 100,000 Americans and 1,000 Israelis waiting for organs, which is a tremendous amount. And we don't necessarily have enough for them all to go around. And there's a delicate nature of finding the right match, right? We say often that the organ has to, blood types, it has to match with the person. And every year we have about 7,000 Americans and 100 Israelis die who are on that organ donor list. Some of the statistics are actually coming from HODS, from the HODS website. Another need comes out of, to give you an example, Israel was thrown out of the European network of organ sharing. So we can ask ourselves, why were they thrown out of the European network of organ sharing? Why? Because if you are receiving an organ but not willing to donate an organ, that is considered a Hilul Hashem. It's against the the honoring of God. So it's a mutual relationship that if we, in Judaism, we talk about that you can't just receive, that you have to give as well. The other issue is that there are people who are being arrested every year for buying and selling organs, which is usur, it's prohibited, both in Jewish law as well as in secular law. You cannot benefit off the death of another person, and in this case, we're talking about monetary benefits. And I'm going to come back to the idea of benefiting off the death of someone else, because there is one rule that overrides that teaching. But the monetary piece of it is usur, it's prohibited. And we have, as Jews, gotten a bad name internationally for the fact that we are resistant to organ donation. I'm not saying that that is a pivotal reason why we need to change things. It has never stopped us in the past from being who we are and holding on to our values. But this is the bigger picture. We started in early 2001 with a certain number of organ donor cards that were produced within the Jewish community, and it has grown from 3% to 40%. So we've seen a major shift. And one of the reasons for that major shift is because of the discussion around what constitutes death. So I'm going to get to that in a moment. So the reasons that Jews don't donate, and they are various ones. The first one is the one that, remind me of your name again? Norm mentioned. Can you reiterate it?
The theory that you have to have an intact body and be resurrected in the world to come.
Right. In order to be resurrected in the world to come, that the belief was that you needed to have an intact body. Is this listed anywhere in our sources? Our Torah, Talmud, Mishnah, and all the other sources? Are there any sources that list this? That's a theory. I'll answer that question. No. In fact, there is no source for it. There are references to the resurrection of the dead, Ezekiel and the Valley of the Bones, but there is no reference to the actual capacity to that those organs will stay intact. I want to break that down as well, is to say that organs, when a person dies, go through organ failure. So they are not viable down the line to be resurrected. So for starters, your organs, as you die, are a part of the process of the body breaking down and near the end of life. The second argument, and these are the arguments that are trying to debunk what Hodes will call superstition. They refer to this as superstition. The other issue that addresses that reasoning is that organs cannot remain intact. From the time that you die, in the first year to year and a half, those organs completely break down. So their capacity to be whole is not a logical argument that is used in mainstream Judaism today. Then the last argument is a theological argument, and that is the questioning of what God, if you have a conception of God as divine, transcendent, and acting upon your life, that God, we can't question, if we believe in the idea of creation, that God works with humanity to generate the baby within the womb, that how is it that God could not create or resurrect a human being if they're missing kidney or the heart or something. So that was the other way that argument was debunked. And one of the, one second, let's see what I've covered. Another, let's see, I talked about needless deaths. So that's that idea that I referenced before, that someone who is on the donor list but never comes up, is never placed at the top, who is not able to receive that organ and dies beforehand, the number of needless deaths that we have in America, and I'm touching on Israel as well, have been too high. One second. Okay, so there are 3 prohibitions that we look to when we're determining the answer, the question to whether organs can be donated at first. And one of them I think you mentioned, which is the desecration. Did you? Was it?
I think it's that.
The sanctity. So we talk about 3 different halacha in that respect. One being isur nevel hamet, which is the prohibition against desecrating the body. It is a biblical prohibition that keeps us from doing needless mutilation. And so in the article, you'll also see a section on autopsy, which has, within Judaism, we have certain exceptions that we make that allow for autopsy and others that don't. And the prohibition is against needless mutilation. So there has to be a very good reason for the autopsy, which may be that in down the road that someone's life will be saved as a result of that autopsy. And also you have civil issues like if you determine who is at fault and limit them in their actions going forward, you prevent the possible death of another person. So I touch a little bit on autopsy there. But so we have Isur Nevul Hamet. I talked, but autopsies are permitted if needed to determine the cause of death and thereby saving a life. Now, civil law in modern day Jewish practice and in America today trumps the halacha on this. So, and you know, when I am working in the ED, in the ER, and the police come in and say there is a question as to whether the story behind the death of this person, and there may have been a felony involved with this, that they are required to take the body and do an autopsy in it. And we step aside for that. This term that you reference, which is about saving the life of a person, is a core argument that informs every single, I looked at the tshuva, the responses on several different rabbis from across the board. Pikuach nefesh, saving a life, overrides the example of Isur Nevul Hamet, the desecration of the body. Because those, you know, when you're removing organs from the body, that can be considered desecration of the body, right? We're opening the body up. If you've ever seen an autopsy done, it's the cut here, and then I think I'm sorry, I know too much. If it gets too grisly, just tell me to stop. Which is, in Jewish law, that's considered a desecration of the body. So, pikuach nefesh, which is saving a life, overrides nivul hamet. And in the 1700s in Prague, the chief rabbi of Prague argues that you can do an autopsy if the results will most likely save a life, which I inferred here. So the second halacha, the Jewish law, that can be used to argue against organ donation is Isur Halanat Hamet. So what is Isur Halanat Hamet? That is the delaying of the burial of someone. So if there's an autopsy, if organ donation is done and that delays the burial, that is a halacha that considers it a desecration of the body. The body will decompose. We do not remove blood from the body. The blood is considered life. So we don't replace the blood with embalming fluids. We don't embalm. And so if you're delaying the burial, the body will start to decompose. However, we know now that a body can be placed in refrigeration and can be frozen in time, so to speak. So there are times, as was mentioned earlier today, when family coming from far away can't get here in time, where we can put it off, but we still do not replace blood with. So Isur Hana'at Hamet is the delaying of burial. That was a second argument against organ donation. And the third one is Isur Halan, oh, I'm sorry. The delaying of burial is Isur Hana'at Hamet. Isur Halanat Hamet is we are forbidden from getting benefit from a body. Right? We talked about that before, that you cannot benefit from it. And I mentioned that. I'm not going to go back and reiterate it. But so these are three different halachic prohibitions, and the question in this modern day and age is actually, what does the role that pikuach nefesh plays, saving a life? And then we will see in a few minutes what determines whether someone is alive or dead. And that has become an issue of conversation in the last 40 years, because whether someone is alive or dead, it looks like life is being extended because of technology. So pikuach nefesh overrides all of these commandments. Now there's also the issue of emotions, right? I was talking with a friend of mine last night, and she was saying, I'm not going to donate my organs. And she was saying, well, what if my organ goes into someone whose behavior I abhor? You know, what do we do when they don't reflect my values? So that was a really good point. That was for me, I was kind of stumped in that moment. You know, does that override pikuach nefesh, saving a life? And in fact, if you've ever watched Chicago Med, and I think one of the other ones, they actually had a case there about a child whose father was killed when she was very young. She needed a heart. The man who killed her father, in his last wishes, right before he was the electric chair, or it's now something else, the liquids, he wanted to give her his heart. You know, so we have that. I mean, that's a dramatic case of it. So what is written there? So if you could consider that if your loved one needed an organ, would you want someone else to get over the emotional inhibition and donate their organ? So I had that thought last night when I was talking to someone. Get over it. It's my life. You know, there was a part of me, and she was talking in the spiritual realms as well, but not necessarily within Jewish spirituality. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who is a major thinker and one who has ruled on a number of different Jewish biomedical ethics issues, and has turned to regulate. He writes, though it is the nature of people to be very distressed over their deceased loved one, nevertheless, there is a mitzvah not to be overly distressed about donation, in order to save a life with the organ of the deceased. So we're like being commanded according to, he's given this what's called a psak, a ruling on this, which is that you can't be too distressed that a person has died, that the pikuach nefesh is the value that overrides whatever that level of distress you may have. Everyone following me so far? Okay, any questions about what I've already talked about? Yeah.
Well, if I have an organ donor on my driver's license,
Mm-hmm.
I have no choice of what part of my work, or which organ goes to anybody, and I don't have a choice. How do you know that person is gonna get married? You know, what they're, I mean, I don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice, right? So you,
Though living organ donation is also a thing. I got a call that I had matched for a kidney donor from a swab that I did 6 years ago, and they said, you're matched, we want you to do these tests and this test and this and that. And I had to think for a second, am I willing to give one of my kidneys while I'm alive? The answer was, okay, I think I probably am. And I went and I did tests and tests and tests, and I got kind of excited because I thought, maybe I'll actually get to give a kidney, and I'm a pretty healthy-ish person, and send somebody else's life. And then they called me and said somebody else matched better. I said, you don't want my kidney after all.
I would have had the same response.
But it was, you know, so there's organ donation after death, and there's living organ donation, and
Those are
I've seen
touched on in the article.
Giving, you know, who've received kidneys from others or other organs as well that are living organ donors.
Right.
I have a friend who gave a kidney to his wife. To me, that's just the ultimate act of love.
It is. It is.
And keeping it close by.
Yeah. My kidney's not that far away from me. In fact, it's right next to me. There are requirements, and it is not a commandment to donate a live organ. You are not commanded to donate a kidney. So I want to make that distinction. It is a great mitzvah, but is not a commandment. Pikuach nefesh is considered a commandment. It is. What?
It's changed over time.
I thought we had a half hour. All right, I have to get to something that is the crux of the debate today, all right? So I'm gonna skip, I'm gonna give you one Talmudic reference, and then I'm gonna talk about the issue that continues to come up today. And I'm taking 5 more minutes to try to do this, okay? So there is, in Talmud Bavli, in a section called, a Masechet, a book called Yoma, there is a debate over if it's Shabbat, right? And someone was in a building and the building collapsed. Are you supposed to remove the debris to get at the person who's died? So that is the initial reference that is made in this argument, in the argument about Shira. The majority opinion was stated that you dig down until you reach the person's nose, and if you see that they're breathing, then you continue to remove the debris. If they are not breathing, then you stop. You stop because it is breaking Shabbat to remove the stones. So indirectly what that is saying is that the determination of life is based on the ability to breathe, and hence not the ability, we talk about the heart today. In Yoma it talks about, it makes the reference to the navel. But it's the debate now between breathing as a sign of life or not, and the heart being the core determinant. And you have diversity within the Orthodox community that closest follows the halacha, or interprets it in one way. And then you have the common practice I'm using very broad terms, amongst the Reform, the Reconstructionist, and conservative movements. So this now goes to what constitutes death, right? That's the original, one of the original texts, and the way they determined it is that you could put a feather under a person's nose to see if they were breathing. Now we coming into the present time, to artificial ventilation. So what do we do if one is being artificially ventilated, but there is no brain activity? Okay, so we are considering organ donation. We are looking to pikuach nefesh, but we cannot kill a person in order to take their organ. So if you can't kill a person to take their organ, then you have to determine what starts life and what's a sign of life. So and I see this over and over again in the ED, it has been determined by the majority opinion amongst rabbis and amongst Jews in America today, that if there is a completely flat brain, there is no brain activity whatsoever, that is a sign that someone has died. That is in spite of the fact that their heart may be beating. So that's the distinction, and that's where the debate comes in. Some rabbis will look at that and say, it doesn't matter if they're ventilated. I don't consider that artificial. They're continuing to breathe, and their heart is beating, and I consider that a core determination of life. Now, if you look at the science here, which is what we have today that our ancestors did not have, the brain is constituted, there's the cortex and there's the brainstem. And the brainstem is what dictates the capacity for breathing, right? If the brainstem is not functioning, that is considered brain death. If the cortex is not functioning, that could be simply a sign that someone is in a coma or in a continuous vegetative state. The coma and the continuous vegetative state are considered being alive. So if the brainstem has been destroyed, i.e. there are no brain cells alive, then there's no way for the person to breathe. And if there's no way for the person to breathe, if you remove the ventilation, the heart depends on the ventilator to continue functioning. Brain death one second, I want to get to my brain death notes so I can make sure that I describe this correctly. Most organs are taken from a person who is brain dead. That is where the brain is not working, but the person's heart is beating because it is artificially getting oxygen from a ventilator. Without the ventilator, and this is what I was just saying, the heart would stop beating on its own in a matter of minutes. So if the body cannot direct, if the brain cannot direct the brainstem to send messages to the lungs to expand and contract, then the heart is not able to function. If you think a beating heart is always a sign of human life, then you would not allow organ donation, and that is the case today. We do see people who make that determination because you would be killing the donor. If you think the person is dead, then you would allow for organ donation because you're saving 8 lives. And 8 lives is because there are 8 parts of the body, organs, that can be donated, okay? So I see in my ED some Orthodox Jews who will not remove their loved ones from life support, i.e. ventilation, because that's considered death. I see other Jews more across the other denominations who go by the rule that brain death is death, and they will take the person down to the OR and harvest their organs. And it's done in a very holy way. Nurses and myself as chaplain are called to the ED, and we process with the stretcher to the elevator It's done very sacredly in hospitals. So the core issue that comes up today is around the determination of brain death. We have, in progressive Jewish communities today, approved of that as brain death, and you have, as Rabbi Axler mentioned before about the HODES website, which is Halachic Organ Donation Society. The HODES organization is predominantly representing the Orthodox view. You will see numerous Orthodox rabbis who follow that same belief that the death of no brain activity allows for organ donation. So the question was, can Jews do organ donation? And the answer is?
Yes!
So, I just wanted to touch on all of, in a half hour, I don't know if I answered your questions, but this handout represents, I think, the wider presentation of the issues, and it also talks about cadaver donation, and it also, the science for science, and it also talks about living donation. So if you have any questions, feel free to come back to the next time I'm teaching this. What? Oh, that's a good question. Let me see. Yeah, I think you're right. 1998, Jewish Publication Society. And that is after 1986, where we started to see more success with ventilation.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, you go.
Thank you.